All right, welcome everybody. We're so excited that you're here for our Enable webinar this month. Whether you're a client of ours and have been around for a while, or this is one of your first encounters with us, we are so glad you're here. My name is Caroline. I am the Creative Marketing Director here at Enable, so welcome. Before I hand it over to Travis, our presenter, I want to go through just a couple little housekeeping items. You can pause or rewind the webinar at any point. Just use the icons at the bottom left of your screen. If you joined anonymously, please put your name in the Q&A chat box. It's a little chat with a question mark, and that'll just let us know who you are. And additionally, in that same Q&A chat box, we'll have some time at the end to ask questions for Travis if you think of any during his presentation. So just type those in there and we'll keep track of them, and we'll get to those at the end of the hour. So Travis, if you could bump forward for me. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So hence the theme of our webinar. We've been sharing tips and resources all month long on our social media channels. So feel free to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn to get in on some of that. We'll continue to do so throughout the month. And for today's webinar, we decided to go seasonal for you guys. So in addition to some cybersecurity basics that we're going to talk through today, we're also going to be telling some spooky cybersecurity stories. So these things have actually happened to real clients of ours, and our goal in sharing these with you is to help you see where you could potentially be vulnerable as well, and to equip you with the knowledge and tools to prevent these same things from happening to you. So leading our webinar today is Travis Phipps. He is our Director of Technology and one of our favorite webinar presenters. And so we're so excited to learn today what you have to share, Travis. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Caroline. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to telling some spooky stories today. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. Let's just kind of dive right in. I think one of the things that we all recognize is that cybersecurity is something that we all have to worry about, and it doesn't matter what type of organization we work for. I know that for a while, some folks have felt like maybe churches weren't necessarily a specific target, but I hope by now everybody recognizes that that's not really the case anymore. Maybe questionable if that's ever was the case, but these, as Caroline mentioned, the stories that we're going to talk about, most of these focus around real churches that have had real challenges and issues. So what are we going to talk about? So we're going to focus today a lot on kind of the human engagement aspect of cybersecurity, and specifically we're going to look at the threat that exists for your staff members. And by now, most of you have probably heard some terms like phishing or maybe even vishing or smishing, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But I wanted to start by talking about kind of a foundational element that we don't always give a lot of attention to. And specifically, it's the idea of social engineering. The term social engineering really is explaining the aspect where an attacker is attempting to manipulate you through some mechanism. And so phishing is one of the common mechanisms that they use to do that, but sometimes what we don't think about is how we feed into that problem simply by some of our day-to-day behaviors. And so one of the things we wanted to point out is that when you're sharing information about yourself through social media, it can seem harmless, right? We're making connection, we're sharing with our friends and our family, and that's all wonderful. But we're sharing personal information, and those are breadcrumbs that we leave. We're sharing information about our kids, like their birth dates and things like that. We're sharing pet names, we're sharing anniversary dates, we're sharing when we're here and when we're not. So if I'm a smart attacker, I'm going to pretend to be you while I know you're out of pocket and not able to engage, right? And so think about the information that you share, and then think for a minute about the security that you have in place, like your passwords and your PIN codes and things like that. Are they maybe related to some of that same information that you share? So I'm not telling you to become a hermit and never express yourself via social media, but I am saying that using a little bit of critical thinking about what you're publishing and how that relates to other aspects of your life that you're trying to protect is probably a really good idea. Now, just in case you're not familiar with some of these terms, like phishing or vishing or smishing, phishing is the term that gets used most commonly, and specifically phishing really is more about an email-based attack, or really not so much of an attack as it is a request to get you to do something, a manipulation tactic. So you get an email that tries to get you to share additional information or to log in to a website or to purchase something for someone, right? They're trying to convince you to do something that you normally would not do. Vishing is just the voice version of phishing. So it's random phone call. Hey, this is Microsoft support. We noticed you're having problems. We wanted to log into your computer and help you fix it. You just need to give us your credit card number and we'll be happy to do that. Well, that is a vishing attack. And then smishing is the text-based version of that. So text messaging or SMS messaging, which is why it's smishing. We've all gotten those. Hey, thanks so much for paying your AT&T bill this month. Click here and we'll give you more information or whatever, right? So these are very common forms of attack that we need to all be aware of and be on the lookout for, and hopefully you already are. All right. So what does that look like? Well, let's look at some phishing emails. And these are phishing emails that are legitimate phishing emails that have gone to church clients that we support. So again, this is not hypothetical information that we're sharing today. These are real. So this first one from Erica, right? I mean, you look at it and you go, well, okay, it's from a young lady and she's asking about getting involved with the church. What's wrong with that? That seems legitimate. But there are some things that you look at here and you go, well, okay, there's a spelling mistake, but hey, look, we all do that. Some of the language, the nomenclature there at the bottom that says sent from Gmail mobile, that's not really a standard thing, but how do you know that? Well, guess what? Sometimes you can't know. Sometimes you just have to go, is my spidey sense going off? If it is, you should pay attention to that, right? The Holy Spirit does speak to us sometimes and help us out. And so we shouldn't just ignore that. But what do you do in this case? You don't want to just ignore a message from somebody that could legitimately be wanting to attend your church and be ministered to. So what do you do about that? Well, here's our recommendation. Our recommendation is if you're not sure, make sure that you only offer already public information in response. In other words, if you're going to respond to this, send links to your existing public website that already mentions information about the times that you meet or the times that your different groups are available, or has contact information for how you officially would normally have someone engage with that ministry or that department. Or maybe provide your already public telephone number that rings to the reception desk. Your reception desk is very familiar with getting calls from people that are interested in attending your church. They're also very adept at recognizing when things don't sound quite right, because they get a lot of those calls too. So share already public information rather than private information that could lead you down a rabbit trail. In this case, what they were working to do was to build rapport so that they could then turn around for the ask, right? And so you just have to be on the lookout for that. The next one here is, I think, a little more obvious just in the way it's structured, but it's from an elder in the church. Well, not really, right? From Elder J. Anderson. This one's a little more blatant, right? Hey, I need a moment of your time, but I need you to do it discreetly, but I'm too busy. I'm in a prayer session, so you really can't bother me. So, just email back and forth. Okay, well, the language, hey, sorry to disturb, maybe not, would be familiar. Maybe the name is legitimate, but is the email address their email address? These are some things to look out for. But especially when they're asking you to do something in secret and only communicate via email or only communicate via text with a number that you don't know, that's fishy sounding, right? And so that would be a phishing attempt. This last one here from Guadalupe Hernandez, this was good, but if you haven't seen this, I'm a little surprised, I'll be honest. This went out just a few weeks ago, and it went out all over at least the US, if not worldwide. But we have connections with lots and lots of churches that are our clients, but also lots and lots of churches that are not. And I can tell you variations of this exact message went out all over the place to lots of church staff. And it's the same kind of thing as the one from Erica earlier, right? It's trying to describe how they're trying to make a fresh start and they want to make a connection and they'd love to connect and then they try to tug on some kind of string and go, hey, I've worked with several Republican campaigns and candidates, and you're like, okay, well, that all seems a little awkward the way that's put together. So that kind of raises a little bit of a red flag. But again, could it have been legitimate? It could have been. Now, the fact that we saw it so broad through so many churches with different names in the mix, well, that was a clue to us that it wasn't legitimate. But again, give them public information. Send them to your public website. Send them your public telephone number that they can call in and engage with you that way. Willing to meet with me after I arrive. Well, offer that they can come by the church when you already have hours established for that kind of meeting. Don't necessarily go out of your way immediately to do something that would potentially put you in jeopardy or at harm, bluntly. I do want to point out this one, again, was very widespread. We're going to talk a little bit later on. You're going to hear me mention a tool called Iron Scales. Whether you use Iron Scales or some other tool that does anti-phishing, we highly recommend it. What I can tell you is in this case, for this particular message and every variation that we saw, the Iron Scales tool that several of our clients have did stop it and kept this from actually making it to the inbox of the churches where that tool was implemented. So there are great tools that can help, but awareness and personal responsibility and critical thinking really are key in how you deal with and address these kinds of risks. All right, so spooky story number one. You've probably heard this one. Shh. Hey, the pastor needs some gift cards, but hey, it's a secret because it's Christmas time. And so as the senior pastor, I am wanting to gift everybody on staff with an iTunes gift card. And so I need your help, admin assistant. Will you please purchase these gift cards, but don't tell anybody. We really don't want to go through the finance department for this because, we want to gift it to them. It's a surprise to them too. And so, if we could just, do this via email, if you'll just put it on your personal card, we'll reimburse you. I mean, I'm the senior pastor. I'm telling you, we'll reimburse you. No worries, right? But all of this was via email. And so this is not a hypothetical story. This is real. And I could tell this story time and time again from multiple churches where unfortunately this happened. In some cases, the good news is at some point along the way before the money was spent, they had hey, something about this doesn't sound right. But unfortunately, in this particular instance, thousands of dollars of gift cards were purchased. And if you don't know the rest of the story would be that once you've purchased the gift cards, you go, okay, I got them. I'll bring them to the Christmas party and let you hand them out. And then what is the response? The response is, well, no, actually, if you'll just scrape those off and just send me the pictures, I want to give them to everybody electronically. I was just going to text it to them. Right? So now they've got you. If you scratch those numbers off and you give them the pictures, well, now they have all the money from the cards. They're going to siphon all that money off and they're gone. Right? And so in this case, unfortunately, thousands of dollars were lost by this church staff member because they fell for fake Pastor Bob, right, requesting gift cards. The key element there was that it wasn't really Pastor Bob. They were spoofing, pretending to be. In this case, I can tell you this client now uses Iron Scales to protect against these kinds of things. But let's take a look in depth at this story. Let's dig in a little on the technical side. What were the critical moments in this interaction, in this situation? Well, the first one was, the admin assistant, who in this case may or may not have had a pretty good relationship with the senior pastor, knew him well, right? But she never questioned the secrecy or the kind of weird offness of the request. Right? She probably had a few alarm bells going, well, this is kind of different. This is kind of weird. But in a, hey, I want to serve. And hey, my pastor's asking me to do this. And sometimes this has happened when it's a new staff member and they just didn't really know any better, and they thought, oh man, I'm so honored. The pastor has asked me to participate. Well, some of those things might have been some red flags to raise awareness. They didn't have, this client at the time did not have any kind of anti-phishing service in place, like Iron Scales or something else. But they also didn't have a real process in place, or this employee wasn't aware of it. If they did, what are you authorized to use your personal card for on behalf of the church? And what would the process look like to be reimbursed? And for some churches, that's normal. But is there a dollar cap on how much? Is there a normal approval process or paperwork that's required to make sure it's legitimate? If there's not, I would recommend there should be, right? So as we look at our lessons learned, well, let's have a process and let's make sure we follow it every single time, regardless of what the senior pastor says. And in quotes, I'm saying senior pastor because it wasn't really the senior pastor. But my advice is even if it was your lead pastor, well, everybody needs to follow the process because the process exists to protect every person and the organization. And so a lot of times we're like, oh, but it's the lead pastor. We don't want to make him jump through those hoops. And well, then you're leaving yourself open to this risk. And I don't think there's a lead pastor anywhere that I've met that would feel good or okay with the church losing money or an individual in the church losing money because of something like this. The second lesson learned is anti-phishing service. You guys are going to think I'm a broken record and I'm just here to shill for this one tool. I'm really not. I kind of don't care which tool you use, but I can tell you that Iron Scales works amazingly well. It's why it's what we recommend. If you know anything about me, you would know that I'm really not the technology shill guy. I'm not really a fanboy for most things. Some people might disagree with that, but I'm really not. But man, Iron Scales, it's kind of like, dang, how does it work so well? So that's why we really just kind of push for it and go, hey, it really does work this well. So in this case, what would have been the trigger had the staff member been alert enough to look, the attacker used something called display name spoofing. In other words, the display name on the email that she received said Senior Pastor Bob, which is whatever Senior Pastor Bob's email would normally say. But if she had looked at the email address that it really came from, she would have seen that it was some random Gmail address. That is not Senior Pastor Bob's real email address, right? So knowing what red flags to look for is important. Understanding display name spoofing as a common threat vector, also very important. All right, so let's look at spooky story number 2. Boo! It's a hacked email and online vendor wire fraud. Now, this one is a client of ours. This is a real story from a client of ours. They're not a church. In this case, they happen to be a title company, but just to be honest, what the story highlights is the attack vector really wasn't because they did anything. The title company wasn't phished directly. It was a vendor of theirs that was the attack vector for the title company. So here's the story. So the story is this: a non-client email got compromised. In other words, the real estate agent had their email compromised. Somebody got their password and they were logged into the real estate agent's email account. So from there, they were able to explore and find dialogue with folks from the title company. So the real estate vendor, who is not a client of ours, was compromised. But now because they were compromised, their legitimate email mailbox was being used to communicate to our client, the title company, right? And so the hacker was able to watch the real estate agent's email, figure out how they communicated with the title company, figure out what information was typically exchanged between them, and then proceeded to just send an email from the real estate agent to the title company, pretending like they were the real estate agent, right? And so what they asked for was, hey, can you change the funds transfer, the EFT information for this particular person? We need to change it to a different account, different bank, different account number. Now, typically, the title company has a process that says, hey, when we get that kind of request, we're going to call the end user on a phone number that we already know for them, and we're going to talk to them about it. But in this case, because the hacker had all of this information, they were able to verify the identity all via email. So back and forth emails between the title company and the real estate agent confirming that they were legit and real. And so they proceeded to make the change and they wired the funds. And then they realized the mistake. So then the title company called the bank to get the money back. Now, in this case, the bank worked with them and they were able to recover the funds, but the bank put some requirements on the title company. They were like, hey, look, you fell for it. It's your fault. So we're going to make you do some things to prove that you've upped your cybersecurity before we're going to give you your money back. In this case, they specifically required updated and evidenced proof of updated antivirus and anti-malware running on every single workstation. But again, keep in mind, the real attack started with the vendor that the title company uses. Okay, so critical moments for this one. Well, guess what? The realtor did not have multi-factor authentication, or MFA, turned on their account. And if you don't know what some of these things are, we're going to get to that at the end. We're going to give you some great resources so that you can understand how to implement that, because you're going to hear us tell you, do it. But we're going to tell you how, I promise. So the realtor didn't have MFA, so they were an easy target. Somehow their password got compromised, got leaked, and the attacker was able to log in and pretend to be the realtor. But also, the title company, they didn't follow their normal process, right? So at that critical point, if they had said, okay, we've gotten this request, now we're going to do what we say we do, and we're going to call the person on the phone number that we already know for them, not one that they just sent us via the hacked email account. It's a clear distinction there, right? Don't just trust what's coming from the email. Take information that you already know to be legitimate and true from elsewhere and go engage and follow a procedure, even if it feels excessive, to get to the bottom and figure things out. So lessons learned, MFA, turn it on. Turn it on for you and ask all your vendors to turn it on for them. Don't be shy. Everybody should be using multi-factor authentication these days. Follow your procedures and your processes. If you've built them out, you did it for a reason. It's to protect you. It's to protect your users. It's to protect your church members. It's important that you follow them then. Trust your gut. Something sounds fishy, smells off. Well, maybe it is. Do some extra due diligence and validation. Use email encryption. So if you are using Microsoft 365, it's baked into the platform. Depending on your license type, there could be some differences and nuances, but pretty much anybody using that platform has the ability to send encrypted emails to ensure that you're not sending confidential information like account numbers and credit card number. None of that should ever go via standard email, right? And then in this case, like the bank came back and said, hey, make sure that your antivirus and your anti-malware is up to date, that it's actually installed and that it's actually working. Well, sometimes we take for granted the simple things. There's a simple one. We can all do it. All right, spooky story number 3, the landscaping nightmare. Oh, by the way, the title company stood to lose 140 grand in that process. Now, again, bank got it back, but real dollars. The $10,000 landscaping nightmare. This one's a church. Church has a landscaping company. Your church probably has a landscaping group, right? They had some work done. And the typical process is, hey, we do the work, and then landscaping company comes by in a week or so and picks up a paper check. Kind of typical. Landscaping companies, a lot of times not necessarily cutting edge technology. Okay, so there's the deal. But hey, look, everybody's moving to this electronic payment system, right? And so on Tuesday, the church facilities director, who oversees landscaping things, got an email from the landscaping company, right? And they said, hey, could you just wire us the funds instead of us having to come by to pick it up? That would be great. And here's all the information. So facilities guy thought, well, that sounds great. So just forwarded that email right along to accounting and said, hey, our wonderful, landscaping company that we worked with forever, instead of doing the paper check thing, we're just going to do it electronically. Here's all the information. Will you go ahead and just, issue that wire transfer? So Tuesday, the email comes in. By Thursday, finance team, who was totally on top of things, was like, sure, no problem. Sent the wire transfer. It processed over the weekend. Monday morning, landscape company shows up, says, hey, just here to pick up my check. How are things going? And they went, well, you asked us to wire you those funds. No, we didn't. So $10,000, by the way. Now, in this case, they had a cyber insurance policy. This church was able to file a claim against their cyber insurance policy. Oddly enough, you know the amount of their coverage? $10,000. So they were able to get it back through an insurance claim. But had the dollar amount been bigger, they wouldn't have gotten it all back. Had they not had a good cyber insurance policy, they wouldn't have gotten it back. So let's look at critical moments here. Guess what? No MFA. In this case, MFA wasn't necessarily a critical component to the attack, although we don't know. I'll just be honest. We don't know if the email that came from the landscaping company legitimately came through their mailbox, like a compromised account, or if it was a display name spoof where they faked it. We're not certain on that, but it could have been either one of those that we've already talked about. So in this case, the request to change, the typical process went through two people and word of mouth. Hey, can we just do this? Right? So there was no real process involved. There was no checks and balances, right? The church at that time did not have a process with any checkpoints to make sure that the change was confirmed with the original source. In other words, the finance person didn't have a process that said, hey, if we're going to make that kind of change, I'm going to call the landscaping company on the phone number that we know is real for them, and I'm going to talk to them and make sure this is real and this is legit. They didn't have that process then, but you bet your bottom dollar they do now. So MFA, turn it on. Multi-factor authentication, really, really good and important. But have that process, have that checkpoint. If you're changing something, especially financial related, make sure that you talk to somebody you know over the phone on a phone number that you already know, not one that you just got via email. Use that email encryption piece, right? So if you do need to capture that important wire transfer information or something, you can send an encrypted message and they can reply in an encrypted form with the information. Or, you know, they can give it to you over the phone because you already know them and you're talking to them to validate this, right? So there's a couple ways. And then guess what? That cyber insurance policy was really important. If you don't have any kind of cyber insurance policy, I highly recommend that you get one. If you're not sure what your coverage is or how it works, I highly recommend you talk to your insurance agent. Whoever you're using for your traditional insurance at your church already, I promise you they have a solution to help you with cyber insurance coverage. Now, historically, sometimes that just looked like a rider on whatever existing policy you had. These days, we're seeing more and more, it's a specific, unique policy that provides a deeper set of coverage, probably at a higher premium. More folks are falling for it and are losing money. And guess what? The insurance companies are not in the game of losing their own money, so they are raising their premiums to provide this coverage. But you need to make sure you know what your coverage is, and you need to make sure that you have the right policy for your organization. And as it relates to the technology side of that, if you're an Enable client, involve us in the conversation with the insurance company. Let us help vet the coverage options, and at a minimum, let us help answer the questionnaire that they're going to require you to provide. You don't want to be guessing at the answers to those questions. Let your technology experts help answer those questions for you. If you're not an Enable client, use your technology experts to help you in that process. And if you don't have one, I know a great company that'd be more than happy to help. All right. So let's look at spooky story number 4, the crumbling password vault. So this one's a real simple one. User at a client had information that she was storing in OneDrive. We love when clients are using the tools that we have helped to implement. So OneDrive is a great Microsoft tool to store private personal information. In this case, this client had not yet turned on multi-factor authentication. And for whatever reason, somehow her password to her Microsoft account was leaked and was compromised. So remember our realtor earlier that this happened with? Well, now this happened to a church employee. Her password was compromised. The attacker was logged into her account. She was also logged into her account and using it every single day. She had no idea that somebody else was also logged in. But since they were logged in, they took the opportunity to go explore. They explored her email. and they explored her OneDrive. And guess what they found in her OneDrive? They found a spreadsheet with all of her passwords in it. So now, because they were in her account, they had opened this spreadsheet, they now knew her password for Gmail and her bank and her Facebook account and every other account that she used in her life, in her digital life. Now, in this case, the good news, she had different passwords for a lot of those services, but she put them all in a spreadsheet and left that spreadsheet very easily vulnerable to being compromised. And that's what happened. So we were able to help lock her account back down in Microsoft 365, right? We could kick the attacker out and make sure they didn't have access anymore. And we could help protect her account by enabling, multi-factor authentication. But they had a copy of her spreadsheet. And so now all of her other accounts that they had just gotten copies of, right, kept getting compromised. Now, thankfully, in this case, nothing truly bad happened other than it was very a painful process for her to have to get those accounts with passwords reset and locked back down and protected and all that kind of stuff. But it could have been really bad. Imagine if they had gained access to a bank account or had access to other information. Could have been much, much worse. So critical moments here, she didn't have multi-factor authentication on her account. So she was an easy target to get into her Microsoft account. And then it was a gold mine because she wasn't securing passwords in a secure way. She wasn't storing passwords in a secure way. Better way to say that. So lessons learned, turn on multi-factor authentication. You notice a theme here? And by the way, notice that we wrote here that user involvement is required in that. Multi-factor is not something that your IT department can just make happen. Users have to be engaged in that process. And that multi-factor thing is where now to log into an account, you need a username and a password and some other form of authentication, a code from your phone or an app that's running on your phone, or even a text message that you receive to your phone number. Those are all versions of multi-factor. So what else do we learn here? You need to store your passwords not in a spreadsheet in your OneDrive. Our recommendation, strong recommendation, is use a password manager application for this. And there's all sorts of them. We'll point you to some resources here in a minute that you can go take a look and find one that works best for you. But the key is use one. And that means that every account that you log into is going to have a unique, different password. It can be very complex because the idea is you're not memorizing those passwords. You're storing them in a secure password vault. And that password vault is going to be protected by one really strong passphrase, a really long password that nobody could ever possibly guess, and you never, ever, ever use it for anything else. And you might even put multi-factor authentication on your password vault to even further protect it. So those are some key lessons learned. Now, with that said, how do you keep this stuff from happening to you? How do you protect yourself and your organization from these kinds of spooky stories happening? Well, guess what? You've got to train your staff. You've got to make sure that you are teaching them about these risks. This webinar might be a great resource to help you do that. The information from this webinar certainly should be a great resource to help you do that. You need to make sure that your staff know they are a target, and they need to know what the common threats look like so they know what to watch for, right? So you attending this webinar, you are training yourself. That's great. Don't let it stop with you. Multi-factor authentication, use it. And don't just stop with your bank account. Don't just stop with Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. Turn on multi-factor authentication for every system that you possibly can. If your church management system supports it, turn it on. If your facility management system supports it, turn it on. If your tools don't support it, go ask your vendors why not. It really is that important. Microsoft has research, and you can go look this up, but 99% of account compromises are thwarted by having multi-factor authentication turned on. It really is that effective. The anti-phishing thing that we talked about earlier, I've mentioned Iron Scales a couple of times. It's what it's the tool that we recommend, but there are others. I don't care which one you use, but you should have something more than just a spam filter protecting your email these days. These phishing attacks use unique methods and mechanisms, and your spam filter is not designed to stop them. But tools like Iron Scales work in a different way, and they do a great job at identifying them, and they do a great job at helping you to remediate the problem if it exists. In other words, if a phishing message were to arrive in 15 of your staff members' email mailboxes, if you don't have a tool like this, you're going to do what? Call them all and tell them to delete that message once you realize it? Well, that's tedious. There's other mechanisms, but with a tool like Iron Scales, what if you saw that message and could click one button and immediately have that message removed from all 15 mailboxes? So you're immediately protecting the entire organization just because you spotted the problem once. That's amazingly powerful and amazingly helpful. Use a password manager. And part of using a password manager is making sure that you're using unique passwords and strong passwords, and you're storing them securely. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to that, but a password manager is a key element to help empower that process. And then, have you heard me say this yet? But you really need to do training. Notice it's the first bullet, and it's also the last bullet times 3. It's that important. You have got to make sure that you are educated, and you have got to make sure that every person on your staff is educated. There is not a person on your staff that is not a risk to your organization, because they are a target, just like you are. Right. Next slide here. So let's talk about some of those resources. I told you we'd tell you how. Here's some resources that we've made available that we have published over the last months and years as it relates to cybersecurity. The first thing I want to highlight is brand new, the cybersecurity checklist. This is something that Enable has created and produced, specifically focused around helping churches improve their cybersecurity posture. So you're going to get to that checklist and you're going to see that there's things like training mentioned. You're going to see things like good password policies mentioned. You're going to see things like multi-factor authentication and Iron Scales and some of the things we talked about here. But the checklist is made up of 15 different elements that are specifically focused on cybersecurity. And my strong advice is you need to take that checklist. I'm actually, look, I'm not a printer guy in general. I don't print paper. I'm like, everything's electronic. But in this case, I'm going to encourage you to print that thing out, take a pen, and see which of those boxes you can legitimately check and say, yep, we've done that. And if you're not sure if you can check those boxes, you need to make sure that you're talking to your IT or technology experts about that. And if they're not sure or you're still not sure, then give us a call. We're happy to help talk you through that. We're happy to help explain some of the boxes more. Our goal is to protect you. And so by doing that, go through the checklist. It's an amazing resource to help you know if you're getting the basic cybersecurity things accomplished. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every risk factor, but if you can check all 15 of those boxes, I promise you, you are much, much, much better protected as an organization. So please use that free resource, that new resource. We hope that it's very helpful to you. Educate your staff, train. There's a statistic that says that 90% of the vulnerabilities that exist within most small to mid-sized businesses, which is where most churches fit, 90% of your vulnerability and your risk is human, either human error or susceptibleness to phishing or something like that. Only 10% of cybersecurity is technology. So if 90% of your risk is with the people, then you need to make sure that you're training and equipping those people to help protect your organization. Then the Enable blog, and you'll see specifically that we've highlighted the category of security. So if you'll head to that last link there, enableministry.com/category/security, there are lots of very helpful resources, blog resources, where we describe more in depth good use of password managers, good implementation of multi-factor authentication, and what these things are. So definitely take a look at those and make use of those. With that, we have reached the Q&A section of our webinar. So I'm hopeful that some of you have some questions. If you haven't put them in the Q&A panel just yet, please feel free to go type your questions. We would love to answer them.
We did get one question about the resources, just so y'all know, every one of those links we'll be sending out in the email later today with the recording of this webinar. So if you missed any of it for any reason, want to reference anything that we've talked about today, you'll get all those links sent directly to your email inbox. So don't worry about writing those down or anything. That was the only question that came in, which means you did a great job, Travis. Of explaining things. So if there isn't anything else that anyone has, I don't see anything coming through. That was awesome. Do you have any last words you'd like to share, Travis? Anything?
I don't think so. Thanks everybody for attending. I hope this was helpful. And if there's any more we can do to help, then last slide, here's how to get a hold of us.
Exactly, yes. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us today. You can always email us with questions, and like I said, be on the lookout for the recap email with all the links that you'll need. And we had a great time with you guys today. So thanks for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.